Welcome to Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Tonight's guest has appeared on the show several times in the past and has just completed his first book entitled Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own. Now, recently we have had a number of so-called scandals in our media, and we're going to discuss some of them today because I think today's guest will probably agree with me that these stories are carefully orchestrated psyops rather than random scandals. Welcome to the show, Neil Sanders.
Thank you, Richard.
All right, Neil, I mentioned your book in the intro there. Just tell us about it, because it's actually two books.
Yeah, it was
Volume 1 and Volume 2, Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own.
Well, basically, it's a lot of information in there, basically. It was originally going to be one book, but unfortunately, just due to the sheer size of it, I thought it would be better to split it into two, because then it's slightly easier to cope with, really.
So, Volume 1 is subtitled Mind Control, Mass Manipulation and Perception Management.
Yeah, Volume 1 deals really with MKUltra, declassified documents, the Tavistock Institute and English mind control. It then looks at the various techniques, the admitted, documented techniques of mind control, hypnosis, trauma, various drugs and things like that. Psychotronic weaponry, electromagnetic waves and various devices that can cause mind control.
Right. So the nuts and bolts of mind control, essentially.
Absolutely, and then from there, basically, I've been able to have a look at certain people who were considered to be potential mind control victims, like Sirhan Sirhan and Mark Chapman. Also admitted mind control victims like Christine Di Nicola and Claudia Mullin and people like that. And then what I do at the end is I speculate. In the first volume, I speculate on the strange similarities between the Phoenix program, which was an organised chaos. It was essentially violence against the civilians of the Vietnam War, and it was a CIA operation. And the remarkable similarities to the techniques that were used in that and serial killers that came about in America just after the finish of the Vietnam War.
All right. Now the second one is subtitled Mind Control, Mass Manipulation and Perception Management, and this covers the media and film.
Well, it's movies, marketing, movies and music, so it concentrates on a lot of the sort of social psychology, things like the herd instinct. Gustav Le Bon and people like that talk about the sort of mass hypnosis that can happen, how advertisers basically play on these psychological processes of the human brain, you know, without your sort of knowledge of it, and it's very, very powerful. And then what I go on to talk about is how the mainstream media, the entertainment industry, the music industry, how that's all used to sort of coerce people into different ways, how COINTELPRO and various things come in to silence artists that don't go along with the agenda. And then that one rounds up by sort of drawing back on the MKUltra. My postulation is that essentially the LSD explosion in America and the Haight-Ashbury and the anti-war movement essentially in music coming out of San Francisco was actually a military-industrial complex experiment. All the bands were intimately connected with the military-industrial complex, just in the same way that serial killers are usually.
Now, these books are available from richplanet.net. They're priced £15 plus postage. They're also available from Neil's website. Give us a domain name, Neil.
It's neilsandersmindcontrol.com, and on there basically there's the book, and there's also some videos, previous shows that we've done, and some radio shows and such like that.
Okay, all right. Now then, we spoke about the scandals that have been in our media. The Jimmy Saville one of note. What's going on with Jimmy Saville, Neil?
Well, I've totally forgotten about Jimmy Saville, I'm afraid. I'm beside myself with joy at the knowledge that Kate Middleton's pregnant. How can that not be great for the entire
We'll come on to that.
Jimmy Saville. I think the thing about Jimmy Saville is that what people don't perhaps realise is that it's not one person. Jimmy Saville is a tiny portion of an elite sex ring. And we spoke about this on sort of programs before, and we'll cover it today. The Franklin scandal was one of the main ones that we've talked about, and the McMartin preschool trial.
Right. So this is in the mid 1990s, is it? The Franklin
Franklin was
cover
the
up.
mid-90s, yeah.
Right. So this is another sort of sex scandal with an element of cover up and an element of putting certain information out as a scandal, but not all of the information. Just tell us how that works.
Well, I mean, firstly, just to sort of tie it back to the Wales care thing, my contention is that the Wales care home is not an instance where certain people have used their influence to attack these boys. And this is proven by the fact that the owner of the care home went to prison for basically...
So just backtrack a little, Neil, because some people won't be following this. Jimmy Saville is linked to a particular care home in Wales, is that right?
Well, yeah, Jimmy Saville has been linked to several instances, actually through hospitals as well, Stoke Mandeville, I think it's called, and... not Rampton, the psychiatric hospital. And
what does the mainstream media say went on, and what was the scandal at these establishments?
The mainstream media seems to say that basically Jimmy Saville, due to his fabulous influence and the fact that he was making so much money for charity, became a sort of untouchable person. And unbeknownst to absolutely everybody, he was using this influence to abuse literally hundreds and hundreds of children at the various institutions.
At these various children's homes and hospitals and schools, whatever.
Yeah.
Now, so what you're saying, that's not quite the full picture.
No, that's not quite in my mind, that's not quite the full picture. What it certainly appears to be is that maybe not all of these institutions, but certainly in this case, the care home in Wales was being utilised as essentially a brothel, so to speak. The children there are to be used as sex slaves for the members of Parliament, and popular celebrities and people of influence. And this is not an unusual thing. This sounds strange and outrageous, but hopefully we'll go along the examples later. This is not uncommon. It's a military industrial complex intelligence agency style setup where they will use these kids for two purposes. One is just basically they're there for the leisure and pleasure of the celebrities, and the second reason that they're there is to be provided for blackmail against these very same celebrities. And this again, this was actually happening in MK Ultra. There was a lady called Claudia Mullen, and she testified before Congress in 1995, and actually was given compensation and an apology by President Clinton, that members of the MK Ultra, the doctors that were involved intimately in the beginnings of MK Ultra, were basically using her for that very same experience when she was 9. They were basically filming her with secret cameras and pimping her out.
If you think about it, if you get people, let's say, commit adultery or other misdemeanors, that's in the modern age, that's not really going to bother people. Whereas if someone's filmed having sex with an underage child, they can then be controlled.
Well, Silvio Berlusconi is considered to be quite the lad. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's got dozens and dozens of mistresses. He's going to all these prostitutes at his bunga bunga parties. Sarkozy's got a mistress. Everyone knows about this. And you know what it's presented as is, hey, you know what? If I had to go for a drink with a politician, I'd go with Silvio Berlusconi. Like, totally ignoring the fact that he's mafiaed up to here and he was involved in the Propaganda Due scandal and you know, when Roberto Calvi, God's banker, was hanged.
So just to get back to Saville then, you think that Saville was kind of a middleman in getting people to those establishments and then using those children. Is that what you're saying?
It certainly appears to be. And the thing with the Kate Middleton story about her pregnancy, to my mind, again, it's not proof, it's just what I think, is that this is being used as a convenient distraction to distract from the fact that Jimmy Saville was not only linked to these care homes, but he was intimately linked with the royal family. There's numerous photographs of him hanging out with various members of the royal family. Apparently, for some reason, he acted as a go-between, negotiating between Diana and Charles when their marriage was on the rocks. It's also come out in the mainstream media that Jimmy Saville was employed to provide guests for royal parties. Now, whether that is a euphemistic term for children, we don't know, but it's certainly, if you read between the lines, it's very strange.
So, in a way, they're possibly being used as some kind of a trap, you think? So you cite other examples where there's been a scandal, like the Franklin cover-up, and there's this Belgian serial killer, or mentioned several serial killers who you think were not just serial killers.
Yeah.
Tell us about them now, then, Neil.
Well, I mean, the connections to the scandal home are various places. There's Marc Dutroux was a guy in Belgium, and essentially it's very, very strange with Marc Dutroux because he's
a serial killer, killed lots of young girls
I think he actually
did
killed
all
about
sorts of
6
horrible
girls
things to them.
and 2 grown men. What happened was
He had a little sort of
it was a cell
underneath his house.
Yeah,
that he built.
in a basement, which is another thing that comes up and again. People being trapped in cells beneath their house.
Yeah.
The specific thing about the Marc Dutroux case is that it came out in Belgium, and it actually caused a huge scandal because essentially it looked like there was a cover-up.
Yeah.
Furthermore to that, it doesn't just look like there's a cover-up, it almost looks like this guy Marc Dutroux was set up in a position to be able to do what he did. Initially he went to prison, he was given something like a 15 to 20 year sentence for the abduction and rape of 5 women. Him and his wife were basically abducted and raped these 5 women. For some strange reason, he was let out of prison after about 3 years. So incredibly early. It was actually a light sentence for what he'd done anyway. For some reason, he was able to get out of prison early. When he got out of prison, he immediately went around buying 7 houses. He apparently owned 6 or 7 houses, all completely paid for, despite the fact that he was unemployed. He was trained as an electrician, but he was apparently unemployed.
Right.
The interesting thing as well is that basically when he first came out of prison, he was awarded with a pension, an incredibly high pension, which is also unusual given the fact that he was in his 30s.
Right.
He was also given a prescription from the government for no apparent reason to be given an unlimited supply of Rohypnol. Now, Rohypnol, as you might know, is the date rape drug. It's the clear liquid you put in people's drinks, and basically people become completely. You can tell them to do whatever they want, and they will actually do it. So the question is, why is this person doing it? Now, what is strange is the second that he came out of prison as well, his mother got in touch with the police and said, "You need to rearrest my son." I know that when he was released, his psychiatrist said we should never release this person.
Right.
He's a dangerous sex offender. Despite that, they still released him. His mother actually sent letters to the police saying, "My son has got 2 girls kidnapped and being held in a cell beneath his house." The police ignored this.
Right. And there are other instances when the police have searched his house and they've not found there was girls that have been kept in this cell. And so it looks as though the police were being.
Well,
the outrage in Belgium was that the whole system was protecting this guy.
Well, his house was searched twice by a gentleman called René Michaud. And René Michaud was the head, basically it's the gendarmerie, which is the equivalent of local police to FBI in Belgium.
Right.
Now, what happens, the local police were really concerned about Marc Dutroux because all these girls were going missing, and for whatever reason, they were being given the runaround. What happened was, eventually, these 2 girls went missing, nothing was done about it. The parents of the children had to get a private detective. And he basically very soon said, we need to go and look at Marc Dutroux's house. What Marc Dutroux had been doing has been kidnapping girls, sexually abusing them and filming them, sometimes killing them and filming them, and manufacturing these videotapes with a series of accomplices. One of them was named Bernard Weinstein. He was actually a politician from France.
So that film would then be used to control the politician.
Yeah, A, it could be used as a control for whoever it is that's in the group, and B, it could just be sold as a snuff film because there is a market for extreme pornography.
What I've heard is that what they'll do is they'll just send this politician or whoever it is a copy of it, of them doing this dastardly deed.
Yeah.
They then are under control.
What's strange, okay, is that basically his wife was a teacher and the other partner of his was a businessman, he was acquitted, I must say, for legal reasons, called Michel Nihoul. And he was basically he's like equivalent of like a sort of Richard Branson type character in Belgium. Now, as I say, what was going on with these kids were going missing and missing.
And there was a quote from him as well, Neil, where he alludes to the fact that I'm just a small cog.
I'm just a small cog. Well, this is the point. When he was actually arrested and he went to trial, which took for some reason about 8 years to go to trial, which is a classic sort of stalling technique because witnesses die, people change their mind, people move away and stuff like that. when they eventually had to do the trial, by the time the trial had gone, 30 material witnesses had died. The other thing that suggests a cover-up is that basically when Reni Michaud went there to search with the gendarmerie, he went in there with an electrician. I don't know why he was in there with an electrician. The electrician came up from the cellar and says, "You need to go down to the cellar, there's children in here, I can hear their voices." They went down to the cellar, heard these children crying, and for some strange reason, Reni Michaud, rather than saying, "Is there anyone there?" seemingly talking to the electrician, but perhaps talking to the kids, went, "Silence! I can't hear any kids. I'm the police officer here. I'll thank you to keep your opinions to yourself."
So what's the inference here? That there's certain police in on it. There's maybe parts of the judiciary in on it.
Yeah.
The government officials, whatever, are all part of some kind of paedophile ring.
Yeah.
Which is being protected.
Yeah.
And this guy is the sort of evil person in the middle of it
who provides the kids. He kidnaps the children. Basically, they would drive along in a van. His friend would drive it, and they'd slide open the doors, grab the kids and throw them in the back, and that was it, which is remarkably similar to the way that Johnny Gosch was kidnapped, but we'll come on to that later. Surviving witnesses, because not all the children that were involved in it were killed. Some of them, a couple of them escaped actually, and a couple of them were rescued live on television by the Belgian police. They also told the same story of catering to elite people. They named very, very, very prominent people in Belgium, and also talked about child murders, alluding sort of to quasi-satanic ritual and that sort of thing.
I'll just stop you there, Neil, because we're going to go for the first break. We'll be talking more about Jimmy Saville after this. Welcome back. I'm talking to Neil Sanders about scandals in the media pertaining to children. Now then, Neil, there are other similar scandals. Fred West, there's the Joseph Fritzl case, there's the Franklin cover-up, and the Gacy case. You think that very similar things were going on in those cases? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean,
so let's just take Fred West then.
Well, so
you think there were other people involved going to his house, being filmed or what have you?
Yeah, I mean,
so it wasn't just him and his wife?
No. In fact,
did any of that come out at the trial? The other people that were involved?
Well, this is the interesting thing. The two people started talking about it, and both of them hung themselves in police custody.
Right.
That was Fred West and Fred West's brother John, who said that he wasn't involved in the murders, but he was involved in the orgies at the sex cult. What's interesting is that Fred West, some of the girls that basically sort of escaped their grasps or whatever, there's one particular one whose name I forget, she met them one night on the road. They pulled her over, and she'd previously known them but wasn't very keen on them. They tried to sort of lure her in the car by saying, "We're going to one of our parties. We're going to one of our famous parties with, local celebrities and people, so why not come along?" What's really strange is that basically the suggestion is that they were finding girls and stuff like that for these, again, elite sex parties. What's strange is that there is a video that exists of Fred West and his daughter Heather, who he apparently later killed, having sex, that is available on certain paedophile websites and such, and that's never actually been denied. What's strange, as I say, is that with the Fred West case, there's a couple of things that are unusual. Rosemary West was known to be a prostitute, and they filmed all her encounters for whatever reason.
Right.
Okay. The other thing is that basically, as I say, him and his brother John both committed suicide. It's the second that Rosemary West said, "I'm not having anything to do with this, it was all Fred." Fred basically went into a complete depression, so should have been on 24-hour suicide watch, and was somehow able to hang himself in custody, because the last thing that he said before he did it was, "There are other people involved, I'm going to start talking."
Really? Right. Yeah. So he's possibly been murdered in custody, right? To stop the extent of this ring being revealed.
The other thing that was very strange about the victims of Fred West is that every single body that was found in his back garden had fingers from the hands missing, usually the left hands. Now, left hand, this is speculative, but if you were to kill somebody in a black magic style ritual, you would remove something of their left hand to show that you're a member of the left hand path. In witchcraft, if you do something like that, you will remove fingers from the left hand.
Never heard of that before.
Well, this is it. I'm not suggesting that thing, but it's a very curious coincidence, if that is true.
All right then. Do you want to touch on some of the others? We've got the Joseph Fritzl and I think this is pretty morbid stuff for people to listen to while they're eating their tea. But you go on then.
Well, I mean, the Joseph Fritzl thing, the thing that interested me about that was right at the beginning. For people that don't know who Joseph Fritzl was, he was I think he was Austrian, and basically he was imprisoning his daughter or daughters beneath the house in a secret lockup, exactly like Mark Dintro.
And West as well.
And West, and Charles Ing, and Leonard Lake, and Dean Corlin, and various other ones. Basically, he at the beginning it came out when his daughter escaped, and she'd been pregnant, and incestuous, multi-generational children and such like that. When it initially came out, it was suggested that local policemen, local sort of celebrities, local members of Parliament and stuff were also going to Fritzl's house. By the end of the investigation, even his wife didn't know that there was a secret. She just thought that the daughter had ran away, which I don't believe for a second either. So, again, no proof, but it's certainly very, very strange. And was this an identical scenario where people are actually using children for this?
Okay, well, let's come back to Saville then. So why do you think they've brought out this revelations about Jimmy Saville now? To me, the reason why they would not do it while he was still alive is because if he's given evidence, he could just name everyone just to protect himself, right? So that's obviously one reason why it might only come out after he's dead. But why bring it out at all?
I'm not sure. To me, like again, my initial thought was it's to crack down on people who are making speculations on Twitter and stuff like that. It's to basically get rid of the sort of freedom of speech element of it.
Right.
Undoubtedly, it is to hide a broader scandal, because essentially the people that have been definitely named, even by the mainstream, are Cyril Smith, the MP, Jimmy Saville, Freddie Starr, who's persona non grata, Gary Glitter, who's persona non grata, and Peter Morrison. Peter Morrison was the private press secretary to Margaret Thatcher.
Now, just repeat something that you said to me earlier, Neil. I don't know. I'm not quite sure if you actually want to state this, but it could be relevant now. Wrote a book where he talks about handling the media and putting out information. If you've got a particular dangerous scandal that you want to hide, you put out something else which is not quite true, or just tell me what he says in that book.
The book is called The New Machiavelli, and in it basically what he says is that if there's ever a scandal that's going to come out, you take an element of it that is not true and force that through the mainstream so that you are accused of something that is not true, so that basically then you can deny that, garner public sympathy. The other thing that he says is if you're going to go on television, cultivate a speech impediment. Make yourself look dishevelled and silly, because then basically people will be sympathetic to you.
So how does that tie into the Saville thing? We don't want to, because I think he's threatened to sue people, hasn't he?
He has. Basically, the gentleman that you're referring to was named in an article by a magazine called Scallywag. Scallywag is kind of like a private eye type thing, and it did an investigation into this very care home about 15-20 years ago. And in that, basically, in the original Scallywag article, certain other people were named.
Because apparently there were
there's not just the
other mainstream publications were going to cover this, and they were warned off by MI5. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even in the case of Cyril Smith basically was proven that. What's interesting about the Cyril Smith thing is, just like the Jimmy Saville thing, apparently mistakes were made. It was an open secret. Everybody knew it. But what happened with Cyril Smith is he went to Private Eye, in his thing, and said, if you reprint that, I'm going to sue you for libel.
Right.
Now, even though the story was true, he was basically tying them up and threatening them to not pursue this with libel. Thank God we don't live in an age where that could happen now.
Right.
This is exactly what's happened. But again, to my mind, why is this? What it looks like, because we're mentioning names, we're mentioning Cyril Smith, Saville, Starr, Peter Morrison. Peter Morrison, what's interesting about Peter Morrison was he was so well known as a pederast that in her memoirs, Edwina Currie wrote, it's a bit unfortunate getting Peter Morrison in to be the private press secretary of Margaret Thatcher, because he's known to be a paedophile. But it's all right, because he's assured Margaret Thatcher, myself, and whoever else has bothered to ask him that he's very discreet.
Right.
So
a pederast?
Pederast, somebody that aggressively attacks boys.
Oh, right.
Pedophile, but aggressive with it.
Right. Now, All right, and so you think that there's just a tiny piece of this whole thing being put out with Saville and all the other people who've been named. You think it goes much further and deeper?
Well, I think the fact that we're naming individual names, okay, it puts, because most people don't know and don't frankly want to know that this is a tactic of the intelligence agencies to use these children for sex in whatever purpose, either for fun or for blackmail. And so it sounds like it's dirty old man going around. It's an individual case, and yeah, you know, unfortunately these safeguards should have been in place, but they weren't. And that's what's happened. I don't buy that for a second. I think, as I say, because of the connection to Franklin, the similarities to Franklin, the Martin preschool trial, and all these other things, it looks very much like it's institutionalized.
Right. Okay. I'll stop you there, Neil. So it's institutionalized.
Yeah.
So who's orchestrating it?
Probably the intelligence agencies, for whatever reason, either for blackmail, like in the case of Franklin, like in the case of Jeffrey Epstein, or just for pure pleasure for the people. The thing that I'm reminded of is, again...
Is there any trail to the intelligence agencies? Can you actually...
There is rumours of basically, essentially, when they were investigating certain people, scallywags seem to imply that when they were investigating it, MI5 came down on them like a ton of bricks and basically said, don't investigate this anymore. It is a fact that a lot of the evidence that has been collected by the police connected to this case has been lost. The Gillings report, which was the report that was done 15 years ago, was sealed by the police. Now that's only just coming out. And the BBC have decided that any investigation into Jimmy Saville will be done in private.
Right, so control of the media, as we know, which we were going to discuss actually, is largely by intelligence agencies. They have a huge influence over them, and they work in people who are intelligence agencies work in the media. We know this. Yeah. So... Okay, now there's the Haute de la Grande.
That's the one in Jersey, where essentially, again, a very similar scenario, a care home where the story was that these children were being pimped out to very rich clients, including stories of them being taken on yacht rides around the island and such like that.
You think it's the same thing there?
I think it's exactly the same thing. Essentially, the police went in and investigated. They got very top-level forensic scientists in and such, and found bones and blood. They found children's skulls. They'd been doing this investigation for 6 months until a higher echelon of the police came in and went, whoa, 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 hang on, let's have a look at this. And the higher echelon of the police turned out that these skulls that they'd found were actually bits of coconut. Are we really supposed to believe that the police for 6 months couldn't tell the difference between bone and coconut?
Yeah, well, we know that case was covered up, I think. So, okay, so back to the original question, which is, why would they even put out any of these people? Why would they expose any of it?
Well, essentially what they're doing is they're throwing corpses to the floor, to the masses. Like, okay, they're saying, okay...
Because a lot of these people have passed away, they're naming, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, it's very strange, right? There is still a very big question mark about why it has come out.
Right.
And the question is whether some of the original sort of witnesses, or the people who have now come out purporting to be the witnesses, are basically going to turn around and change their story, and then the whole incident might be used as a way to chastise the press for going off half-cocked. In a similar way to the way that people were naming people on Twitter, and they can say, hang on, you look back up because you're naming innocent people.
So they'll throw out a few red herrings for people to report on, and then they get chastised because they've got it wrong.
Yeah, like Max Clifford. It might come out that Max Clifford was accused by somebody completely out of the blue or something like that. Right, and then when it transpires, when he comes out and says, well, we can't have this, we can't have innocent people being vilified in the press.
Let's come on to him then. Now today I actually ran out of toilet paper, so I thought I'd kill two birds with one stone and buy a copy of The Sun. And we'll talk about this front page story in a moment, but the Max Clifford thing's in here. So see, this is a guy who's a linchpin in the mainstream media.
Yeah, Max Clifford does not get caught.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about something else about Max Clifford in a second. Yeah. I'm truly innocent, kiss and tell, Max fights back after 12 hours in cell. Now, do you think this could be one of these red herrings, that he's agreed to be thrown out? I'm not saying this is true, folks, I'm speculating as to what might be going on, that Clifford, with his media chums, has agreed, he said, yeah, arrest me, we'll prove it all wrong, and then that's a way of slapping the wrist.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a possibility. I think that's very possible. And what was interesting about when I was watching it basically on Thursday night, when he came out of the police station, most people won't see this as significant, but his car wasn't there. His car wasn't there. That never happens. You know, if you come out and do a press conference, you immediately get into your car. Strangely, his car was down the road. So poor, sad Max Clifford had to shuffle down the street, being papped all along the way, looking pathetic and walking down to his car.
So you think that is a bit of a psyop then?
I think that's a bit of media manipulation to frame him as, hang on, that's a bit off, isn't it?
So Saville is perhaps a genuine case, and you think that they may be putting out ones that aren't now,
possibly
to sort of stop the net widening, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. Because basically, what they're going to do is they're going to come in with a prefect and go, whoa, 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 whoa. We're all angry, we're all cross, but we're getting carried away with this now, and innocent people are getting hurt. Which is exactly what's been happening at the care homes.
Yeah, nothing would surprise me. Anyway, we're going to take another break and join us shortly. Welcome back. I'm talking to Neil Sanders, and we were just discussing the Sun newspaper. Now we're filming today on the Saturday the 8th of December, and the headline is "Kate Shock as hoaxed nurse kills herself." So this is the story where some hoaxers in an Australian radio program ring the hospital where Kate was in. She was allegedly had morning sickness for 3 days. They rang up, pretended to be the Queen, and managed to get through. They spoke to a nurse, and they managed to get through and get some information. So it was all a bit of a joke. Yeah. And then supposedly, well, according to the Sun, this woman has now killed herself. Now, there's a huge hole in this story, right? Straight away, it says Kate Shock. Let me just state first: this woman may have killed herself, right? But it says Kate Shock as hoaxed nurse kills herself. You turn to the story. Let me just read part of it out, Neil. Sources said she was found unconscious by a worker from the hospital shortly after 9:30 a.m. But here's the key part: a post-mortem examination will be arranged. The death is being treated as unexplained. So the death's unexplained, and they've done no post-mortem and no inquest, right? So they don't know how she died, right? So how can they state on the front cover that she kills herself? See, so they don't. So that's jumping the gun, in my opinion. What it should say is Kate Shock as hoaxed nurse dies. Yeah. Right. So why are they wanting to put out the fact that she's killed herself before there's been a post-mortem or before they found out how she has died? It's quite ironic, isn't it? Because that gentleman in question was suing people for, making statements that are not true or allegedly not true. Is that true? Well, we don't know, but you see that. Let's just assume, or let's just hypothesize, and I'm not saying this is true, that she didn't kill herself and she was murdered. Okay, there's two motives I can think of. One, Kate goes into hospital for 3 days, supposedly with sickness because she's pregnant. Maybe something went on there when she was in hospital, and this nurse knew about it. Possibly, yeah. Or perhaps they wanted to demonise the Australian channel and the people who carried out this hoax against the Crown. Yeah. Right? Maybe that's possibly that would be a motive to demonise the people who've done this prank. It's also an extension of the distraction, isn't it? Because again, nobody's talking about Jimmy Saville. Nobody's talking about. It's quite clever, really, because basically everyone went, "Oh, well, yeah, she's pregnant, that's wonderful. But let's not get distracted about this." What? Someone's dead? Oh, God, that's terrible. And it is, it's horrible that this woman has died. But if you were cynical minded, if you took a step back, you could look at it and go, well, what a perfect distraction. Now then, Neil, Philip Schofield was on his morning show questioning David Cameron. He pulls out this list of supposed people who've paedophiles or been named on a particular website, and someone said, "Oh, you could see one of those names on the screen," sort of thing, and there was a big scandal about it. You just think that thing was a whole setup? Yeah, I think the entire thing was a complete setup. There's several questions that need to be asked, right? Okay, when does the Prime Minister of Great Britain and her territories get interviewed on This Morning? Never. And if he was going to be interviewed on This Morning, they'd have been advertising it for weeks and weeks in advance, saying, we've got David Cameron, he's going to talk to me about utter rubbish on the television. The second point is, when did Philip Schofield grow a pair?
Philip Schofield.
When did he what?
Grow a pair.
What does that mean?
He's going to get some balls. He's not a scoop journalist, right? Okay, he's not. He's Johnny middle of the road. Okay,
when did he grow a pair?
Yeah. When exactly? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, what was it? With the influence of who was it? Gordon the Gopher? Was that it? In his ear, going, you know what, Philip? You need to be a bit harder with these people, these women that come on this morning. Be a bit harsher with them. And luckily, it happened to be David Cameron. I don't believe it. I believe that just like the gentleman that we talked about earlier in the new Machiavelli, it was set up to make David Cameron look silly, so that it garners sympathy. What's interesting about David Cameron's response as well, which is thoroughly offensive if you think about it, basically. Philip Schofield said these names have been named on the internet as possible paedophiles. And David Cameron said, I think there's a danger here that gay people could be demonised. Nobody had said that. But it's quite clever in a way, because basically informed people go, oh, he's right, actually. There is a danger that people who happen to be homosexual could get drawn into this scandal, so we need to be a bit careful. And people who aren't very informed go, yeah, he's right. They're all a bit like that, aren't they? And so it's clever in as much as it basically, again, it's like you said about a phony bone of contention.
Yeah.
It's taken the argument from here and it's put it to here.
Yeah.
If you're looking at that from David Cameron's perspective, either considering that it might be dangerous for people that, or you shouldn't do that, you're assuming that these people on this list are innocent.
So let's come on to the. Why do you think that was orchestrated, if it was orchestrated then?
Purely just to get it in, to take control of it. Again, that was the precursor that basically allowed ITV to be sued. It allowed Newsnight to be sued. Not that they actually mentioned the person that sued them, but they still basically, they actually weren't sued. They gave a voluntary donation, and it's just a way of, again, in the public eye, taking control of the situation and chastising people, saying, well, I best not do that because I don't want what happened to Philip Schofield to happen to me.
All right, Neil. Well, you comparing the Saville thing with some of these other scandals, supposed scandals. So just tell us about.
Well, I mean, the one that was similar and recent was Penn State. Penn State is a university in America, and it transpired that Jerry Sandusky, one of the most sort of, he was a coach. He was involved with the American football team, and this is a hugely successful team and a hugely successful university, and it transpires that he's been having sex with the young boys against their will. And not only has he been doing that, but that's been covered up by the institution, by certain very well-respected people within the institution. And again, sporting instances of sex abuse within sporting institutions aren't uncommon. There was the Celtic scandal. There was a scandal with Gary Speed. Gary Speed, who also killed himself. His former mentor was apparently involved in a very similar scenario, abusing boys.
Gary Speed's former mentor?
Yeah, apparently so, yeah.
A football coach?
Yeah, apparently. Apparently Gary Speed was writing a book at the time that he hung himself.
Right. Do you know anything about the book?
Nobody does.
You got any thoughts on Gary Speed?
Well, I just wonder if he was going to talk about certain things like that. You know, this has been exposed on various websites.
So just go back a second. So Gary Speed's his mentor. Which mentor? When he was at a football club, or when he was younger?
When he was a youth and he was training, essentially, one of the people that was one of his main coaches was later exposed to have been abusing boys.
Right.
Again, this isn't uncommon. There was a scandal through Celtic football club.
Do you know what club that was at? Leeds.
I don't know. It was when he was a youth. It was when he was a very good. The article is actually on David Icke's website. What's interesting is it links it to various other people, including the MP Stephen Milligan, that died in suspicious circumstances.
So he was writing a book. You see, the thing is with Gary Speed, if you think about him, he was a manager of a national side and successful at the time. Yeah. So this is, if you're a manager of a national side, you've got a voice. You've got a voice.
Oh yeah.
You're at a press conference where so people are going to listen to you.
Yeah.
So I can't help think that maybe there was something that he knew or was going to talk about. Very
possibly. I mean, the whole thing that ties in with all these things is that what we're looking at sporting institutions, care home institutions, charitable institutions, universities, preschools like the McMartin preschool that have all provably been involved in this sort of thing. I mean, the extension of and to prove this sort of connection to the elite, the extension of the Franklin scandal was it was connected to a gentleman called Craig Spence. Craig Spence was, I believe, he was a politician or an aide to the Republican Party. He was caught at like 2 a.m. taking a 15-year-old rent boy around the White House. Mm-hmm. When he was caught and questioned, he said that the lad was his nephew, which was provably untrue. So the question is, what we're looking at here, we're looking at MPs, sports players, we're looking at institutions, we're looking at money, sex, and we're looking at blackmail. And the other one that people need to really investigate is good friend of Prince Andrew and Peter Mendelsohn, Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein was doing exactly the same thing, a wealthy billionaire known to be a paedophile.
Can you say that, Neil?
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein?
Yeah.
Oh, so he was.
Oh, he's been
in prison.
He's not been to prison. But he paid off a load of witnesses, but essentially
You sure you can say he's a paedophile? Does it say that here?
Oh, I don't know.
On Wikipedia. Well, you said it, Neil, not me.
Right. Whoa.
Well, I don't know. See, I'm not really.
There was a case with Jeffrey Epstein. Essentially, let me find it. Right, Jeffrey Epstein.
The Duke of York's, this is, it actually says it here, yeah. The Duke of York's billionaire paedophile friend kept a secret journal described as the Holy Grail by lawyers, which listed his alleged underage victims and the celebrity guests he entertained at his Florida mansion. Yeah. That's in the Daily Telegraph.
Whew, we're all right then. Okay. But basically, I mean, the woman that was pimping these girls or was luring these girls for Jeffrey Epstein was Ghislaine Maxwell, who's Robert Maxwell's daughter. Now, what was interesting about the Jeffrey Epstein case was it was a girl called Virginia Roberts came out, and basically there's all sorts of things actually in the first book, talking about drugging and basically being a masseuse at exclusive, I think it was a Rockefeller-run golf club actually, but the thing that Jeffrey Epstein was doing was taking groups of these girls at a time, taking them to his house in Mexico. So he's transporting underage prostitutes across the border, and all these houses were set up with hidden cameras, which is exactly, again, like the Franklin scandal, like the origins of the MK Ultra, like Operation Midnight Climax. It's basically the principal tenet of this is one of the things that we do. If we want to blackmail people, we film them having sex with somebody.
Right, okay. Yeah, it's disturbing. So how do you think you could expose and crack open this kind of activity?
I think it's difficult. It's very difficult for a number of reasons, because one of the things is people don't want to realise that it is institutionalised. People will think that it is just
man in a raincoat. Man
in a raincoat, yeah, exactly. You know, dirty bloke at the end of the street and stuff like that. And it's not. It is institutionalised through the entertainment industry. Corey Haim and Corey Feldman, both the huge film stars, both talked about paedophilia being rampant through Hollywood as well.
What is wrong with these people, Neil?
Well,
what is wrong with them?
And the other one that we've not discussed yet is Paul Gambaccini, who basically came out. Paul Gambaccini's radio disc jockey came out saying, "Oh, it's worse than that. I know for a fact and can prove that Jimmy Saville was sleeping with dead bodies." Okay,
yeah, I've heard that as well.
He's a necrophile, and this came out for one day, and then it was completely shut up.
So he said this, and it was on various websites.
Yeah, well, it was in the Daily Mail, for God's sake.
Right, yeah. Okay.
And then that disappeared.
So he was given the key to the mortuary or something, allegedly?
Yeah, apparently so, yeah.
So do you believe that?
Yeah, I do. Like, I mean, he was given the key to the secure hospital and allowed to wander around and chat with the Yorkshire Ripper. Like, as well, do you know what I mean? Like, so it's not too far of a stretch. What's interesting about Paul Gambaccini is, like, it was in for one day, and then if you go on the BBC website now, you'll find loads of advertisements for Paul Gambaccini's radio show.
So that information about Saville having sex with dead bodies comes from Paul Gambaccini?
Yeah.
And only Paul Gambaccini, is it? Or?
Yeah,
right,
so far.
right.
You then shut up about it,
right.
And since then, he's been heavily publicised by the BBC, almost as if the squeaky wheel got the grease.
Right, explain what that means.
Essentially, they've gone to him and said, "Paul, stop talking about this. You've got two choices. You mention it again, it won't be good for you. You don't mention it again, we're going to make you a star."
Right, so you were telling me before that he's recently appeared on quite a lot of BBC web pages.
Well, yeah, on the BBC.
In a positive light.
Well, he's advertising his radio show, which is not a new radio show. It's just all of a sudden he seems to be advertisable.
You think he's been told to shut up?
Yeah, probably.
Right.
Yeah, very possibly. It's But you know, again, it's endemic through the entire industry. Jonathan King, Gary Glitter. Jonathan King, whose bail was paid by Simon Cowell. Why is Simon Cowell paying a third of, not all the bail, but why is he paying £5,000 bail for a guy that admitted to raping John Lennon? What's going on about that? The other thing that's interesting
John Lennon?
Apparently so, yeah. This is what Jonathan King said.
Jonathan King raped John Lennon?
Apparently, this is what I've heard with him. Well, he says he was consensual, but you know. John Lennon didn't say it, Jonathan King said this.
Is John Lennon gay?
No.
So why is it?
Because that's what he said. The other thing is, I tell you where you can get away with it. You can get away with it if you're Bill Wyman. You can get away with it if you're Pete Townsend. You get away with it if you're Jimmy Page. You get away with it if you're R. Kelly. You get away with it if you're Elvis.
Can you name all those people, Neil?
Get away with it
are you allowed to name all those people?
Yeah, it's in their autobiographies. Bill Wyman ran off with a 13-year-old girl. Jimmy Page ran off with a 14-year-old girl. Pete Townsend used his credit card to look at under 5 rape things. It was researching a book, obviously. R. Kelly is banned from his school, and there's a video of him urinating on a young girl. Elvis married Priscilla Presley when she was 13. Roman Polanski drugged and sodomized a 13-year-old girl.
Where are we going, Neil? I mean, you mentioned that the reason why these rings are not exposed is because possibly intelligence agencies may be involved who control the media and also control people in the police force. Yeah. So they can stop people being arrested, and they can stop stories coming out if they want to.
Yeah.
So tell us about what you know about intelligence agencies and their possible involvement with specifically to mind control.
Yeah.
Because you think it could be some kind of mind control over some of these people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for example, Claudia Mullin, and this is proven, this is in court testimony, she was sent to a place...
This is in the States?
Yeah. When she was 9, she was sent to a place called Deep Creek Valley in Maryland to learn how to sexually pleasure men, right? And this was at the behest of the CIA. Okay. Christine DiNicola was sexually tortured when she was 4. Paul Benassi, who was involved in the Franklin saving and loan scandal, he's the person that kidnapped Johnny Gosch, he had 114 separate personalities in his head. Now, the key to creating alternate personalities is trauma, is traumatic abuse, because I mean it's quite interesting because essentially prostitution, it's a double-edged sword. Prostitutes have to sometimes take on a role, you know, basically to blank it out to get through it, and so they're an alternate personality, and then that repeated trauma again and again and again compounds that. And so especially when you're doing it to children and such like that, this gives them, they are ripe for then turning into mind-controlled subjects. The other element of the mind control is the perception management, the way that the media handles it and the way that the public see these things. And the first thing is the very concept that the public don't really think that this is possible. And again, why would you unless you actually bothered to look into this horrible stuff?
All right, Neil, well, that's all we've got time for today. We are going to talk about mind control in next week's show. But until then, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night. Welcome to Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. I'd like to welcome back Neil Sanders onto the show. Welcome back, Neil.
Thank you, Richard.
Now then, last week we discussed your book called Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own, or your two books. One which covers mind control, or the nuts and bolts of mind control, and the other one is all about the media and films and music and that kind of thing.
Personal and mass.
I haven't read all of them, Neil, but I've read parts of them, and I've read the chapter on hypnosis, or the CIA's investigations into hypnosis as to what it can be used for.
Yep.
And it's pretty disturbing, folks. I just want to read this part here. It's talking about, this is in 1954, is it George Easterbrook?
Yeah, George Easterbrook, yeah.
He said that I will take a number of men. So he's a hypnotist, and
yeah, well, he was an established hypnotist, a psychiatric hypnotist who was in the field of medicine, but basically he seemed to be so good at it and so lacking in scruples that he made a series of proposals to the CIA. The CIA says, all right, if you can do what you say you do, bring it on, let's see what we can do.
This is one of his proposals. I will take a number of men and will establish in them, through the use of hypnosis, the condition of split personality. Consciously, they will be ardent communists, fanatical adherents to the party line. Unconsciously, they will be loyal Americans, determined to thwart the communists at every turn. These men will have no knowledge of ever having been hypnotized, and can only be hypnotized by such persons as the original operator may choose. Consciously, they will associate with the communists and learn all their plans. Once every month, they, as loyal Americans, will tell what they know. This sounds unbelievable, but I assure you it will work. So what he's saying is, it's possible to make someone seem like a completely different person who has different goals and is following a different agenda to what they really are, and they're not even aware that they're doing that.
The one that immediately springs to mind is Lee Harvey Oswald, who at times was anti-Russian, pro-Russian, anti-Castro, pro-Castro, CIA, anti-CIA, anti-American, pro-American, and at the same time was seemingly able to go between America and Russia and back and receive money for it.
Well, the people that spring to my mind, Neil, are people in the truth movement.
Well, yeah, that is certainly possible.
People, not everyone. Now, and also Raoul Moat, who I gave a talk about a few weeks ago, and I'm still trying to find out information specifically about PC David Rathband and his relationship with Lisa French. So if anyone has any information, please contact me. But yeah, you were going to make a comment because you were quite interested in the Paul Gascoigne.
Yeah, I thought I thought that you picked that up really, really well, because essentially it was when Paul Gascoigne was saying, "Oh, I know this guy," and then he woke up the next day and he didn't know the guy. And I think that he very possibly did know the guy. I think he's yeah, but not as Paul Gascoigne.
Well, I worked something out actually. Let me think. I think Gaza has said that when he played for Newcastle, he used to see him on the doors in the town.
Yeah.
Right? When Gaza played for Newcastle, Raoul Moat was 15, so he couldn't have been a doorman in the town.
Well, the thing is, right, I mean, this is highly, highly, highly speculative. Okay, but you could make the argument that there are distinct personalities in Paul Gascoigne's head. Okay, so where's the evidence of this? Well, there's 2 points. I don't know if anyone's seen the footage of Paul Gascoigne basically saying that he's been asked to take the Pope to play darts.
Yeah. Now, you sent me a link to this, but this appeared on, was it the Daily Mirror website? It was one of the mainstream newspapers. So it's someone who speaks to Paul Gascoigne in a pub, and he's secretly filming Paul Gascoigne in the pub, and he's pissed.
Yeah.
And he's rambling on.
Yeah, but this is not an isolated incident. Like, apparently, there was a documentary I saw a few years ago of his home life, living with his ex-wife, whose name escapes me. And apparently he used to do all sorts of things, like he used to hide Bibles in the fridge and be obsessed with the number 13 and constantly think that the Queen and the President and all these various people were trying to get in contact with him, and basically he had missions to do and such.
Well, a lot of people watching this, Neil, will say, well, I went and see Newcastle United when he first started playing, and he's daft as a brush from day one. So
yeah, I don't doubt that.
So is he just?
I don't think he's an assassin. I don't think he's a spy. I don't think he's useful for that.
But you think he's been messed with?
Yeah, I do, and here's the reason why. And again, most people will go, nonsense. What's the point of? What is the function of sport? Right, the function of sport is amusement focus, as Zbigniew Brzezinski would call it. Okay, what it is, it's bread and circuses. It's getting the masses all into one thing that's really not that important, and then splitting them down into teams so that they can argue and fight with each other. H.G. Wells in the Coming Conspiracy, or Coming, I forget exactly, I think it's called The Coming Conspiracy, wrote about this, and this was few decades ago, and basically he was saying on a Saturday afternoon, what we'll do is we'll get these people, we'll dress them up in brightly coloured uniforms, and we'll get grown men in teams to play sport against each other. And at the time it was like, well, that's ridiculous, nobody do that. Sport is for children. Football is for children. At the time this was the thought. Now we have nothing but amusement focus. We have television shows, serials, sitcoms with people like Charlie Sheen going off the rails.
Dancing on shite.
Oh, exactly, and all this rubbish. And what's the best way to maintain that, okay, is to occasionally mess with somebody so that they've got the ability to perform incredibly well at sport. Like, and that sounds, people say, why would they do that? Look at the huge amounts of money in the industry and the way that you can control people through sporting heroes.
Well, I was looking at a clip of somebody called Jackie Milburn the other day, who was a Newcastle United legend, when he was talking about Gaza, when he was a teenager, saying, this kid is a world beater, and he would say, and he'll even tell you that.
I think it's about 35 years since I've seen a kid as good as what this lad is. And I just can't believe the skills of him. He's got everything. And his skills is absolutely unbelievable. Sticks out a mile. And he'll tell you so as well, you know.
Because he's a confident lad.
Oh, confident. He's like Malcolm MacDonald. I think whether it's confidence or they've got to say things to give themselves confidence, I don't know. But last year we were struggling in the first division and could have been relegated, and Gaza was missing for a few weeks. And after one game he says, oh, all right, Jack, he says, I'm back next week, we're safe. And mine were, because we did very well the last 8 or 9 games. But it was him that kept us in the first division. He's the best in the world, honestly, the best in the world.
So do
you know how
if you go by what you're saying, they would have had to have messed with him from childhood.
Yeah, very probably. You know how Tiger Woods got to be as good as he is? His dad hired an ex-army drill sergeant from the United States Marines to shout at him every time he got it wrong.
Right.
To me, just to me, that sounds like trauma-based mind control with the military.
Yeah. Right, so Tiger Woods' dad got this military guy to shout at him.
Yeah.
The other person who springs to mind when you talk about Tiger Woods having some kind of assistance, or some people think he's genetically engineered. The other person is Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah, well, very possibly. I mean, the thing about Lewis Hamilton,
they're these sort of perfect model people.
Well, I mean, certainly the thing about Lewis Hamilton and certain other sporting people is this concept that they're working class heroes, which is just not true.
You see, people watching this, Neil, will be thinking, these guys are mad, right? But if you parallel it with musicians, right, and consider what the mind-controlled various musicians, anyone who's a problem, like Lennon and all of these people, Bob Marley or whoever, who weren't on the line or dealt with, and the ones that they want to give the right message, they control either through mind control or whatever means.
Well, here's an interesting one.
But sports people are just as influential, certain sports people, than music people.
In fact.
So you can understand why they would want control of their views.
It's your leisure time. It's your leisure time. Okay, when you're not at work, you're doing other stuff. So they need to control you whilst you're doing that other stuff. It's interesting you say that about like put people in the public that can be brought down. There's a comedian called Cat Williams. Cat Williams, very, very good, very, very talented black American comedian. He recently, basically like just a few days ago, announced his retirement from stand-up comedy. Right, what's interesting about this is anyone that sort of vaguely knows Cat Williams will go, oh, Cat Williams, he's on cocaine, like he's a drug addict. Of course he's gone off the rails. He's been arrested 20 times in the past month. Well, here's the thing. About 2 years ago, when he just started getting really big, he did a stand-up show, and I think it's called Pimpin's Pimpin'. But basically in that, he's talked about, I've not been famous for very long, and it's blowing my mind. I'm going to mansion parties, like well-known celebrities are inviting me to mansion parties. I'm turning up at these ones, right, okay? I'm looking in the wrong room, and I'm seeing celebrities that I know, black celebrities, you know, macho celebrities, people who he's got a very, very sort of established idea of their image, kissing and having sex. And doing drugs openly in front of him. He says that basically you go to a meeting in Hollywood and the CEO will go, well, yeah, Cat, by the way, what we want you to do for this movie is... And his joke is, well, can you not see me? I'm here. When he was doing this, Professor Griff, who was a member of the hip-hop group Public Enemy, he's been vilified for lots of stuff, mostly for telling the truth and for some slightly unfortunate comments that he made. But he was saying at the time, Cat Williams, watch your back. Within 2 years, they will destroy you, okay? The first thing that happened to Cat Williams was he kept getting pulled over by the police all the time, and they would destroy all his equipment, thus causing him to cancel gigs and stuff like that. Spurious charges, spurious charges, spurious charges. Then he gets onto drugs. Now people will basically go, oh, that's his own fault. COINTELPRO, one of the key fundamental elements of the COINTELPRO, which was the FBI counterintelligence program, which was, we talked about the Rolling Stones previously, that's come out that was a COINTELPRO program. So what were they doing? They were using LSD, Orange Sunshine LSD, which is the CIA's own brand, to demonize the Rolling Stones. Right. They're using cocaine to demonize Cat Williams. They use crack to demonize Afeni Shakur, one of the most prominent members of the Black Panther 21.
Right. They demonized Charlie Sheen.
Yeah, absolutely. By because
he was talking about 9/11.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you know, last time we were talking about Tupac Shakur and the intimate connections with Death Row Records and the CIA. CIA ran Death Row Records, financed Death Row Records. Death Row Records was run by Harry O, who was dealing with the Medellin, cocaine importation. Guess who Cat Williams hired for his security in the last couple of weeks of his tour? Suge Knight, Marion Suge Knight, who was the owner of Death Row Records. Bad move, Cat.
Right. All right, Neil. Well, the other thing that we're going to talk about today is the CIA's control over the media. You highlighted a document written by a chap called Carl Bernstein.
Yeah, Carl Bernstein. Carl Bernstein. People may know Bernstein. It was.
So if people want to Google this article,
it's Watergate,
the CIA and the media by Carl Bernstein.
Right. The interesting thing about this is that he'd already exposed the Watergate scandal with his partner Bob Woodward. Bob Woodward, I'll come on to in a second. Woodward and Bernstein, they were played in, I think it's All the President's Men by Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford. So, a very famous journalist. He investigated the CIA's influence on the general media, and discovered that essentially the CIA owns and embeds reporters in all these different things.
Yeah, it's,
despite being like one of the most sort of prestigious journalists of his time, that was published in Rolling Stone magazine, which is a music magazine, because no other publication would carry it.
It's a big article with a lot of detail, and it just explains how there are all different shades of grey of types of agent embedded in the media. So you've got your person who's just a CIA agent, 100% working for the CIA, being paid for them, who's also working for a newspaper or whatever. But you've got all the way up to maybe someone who's just an asset, who doesn't even know they're being used by the CIA and certainly isn't being paid by the CIA. And then you've got other shades in between where you might have people who just take the odd payment for doing the odd favour. Some people who are providing information to the CIA or presenting stories in a certain fashion for free, just because it's sort of their ego, hey, I'm a secret agent type of thing. But it's absolutely, this is 1977, this article, absolutely rife that in America, all the news media is completely in the pocket of the CIA.
One of the quotes that comes out of that was basically that we don't need to approach individual people anymore, really. We don't need to bribe individual journalists, because we have members of the CIA on the board. Certain ABC and CNN have both been exposed as notorious focal points for Pentagon psychological operations at one point during the Yugoslavia conflict. The CNN had over 1,500 people embedded at CNN's headquarters.
1,500?
Yeah, absolutely. And they were influential in directing the news, making news. When one of them was questioned, he was exposed by a Dutch newspaper called Trouw. And when one of them was exposed to saying, look, are you guys actually, influencing the news? Are you hiding facts? Are you, putting your stories forward? He says, well, I don't know, but I hope so, because that's what I'm paid to do.
Yeah, I heard something on Talk Sport. This is going back a while, and it was a journalist saying, well, I've worked in journalism for years, and these claims that MI5 or intelligence agents control the media is just absolutely ridiculous. I would know about it if that was going on.
Of course you would.
But the thing is, if every single person other than you is an agent, how would you know that they're not?
Well, you can read spies, lies and whistleblowers, and I'll prove that the Guardian and the Telegraph are using people. Here's a right. I'll rebuttal that journalist. This is John Swinton, who's one of the most highly respected journalists in American history. Wait until he retired in 1953 and made this quote to the New York Press Club. He said, "There's no such thing at this date of the world's history in America as an independent press. You know it and I know it. There is not one of you who dares to write your honest opinions, and if you did, you know beforehand that it would never ever appear in print. I am paid weekly for keeping my honest opinions out of the paper I'm connected with. Others of you are paid similar salaries for similar things, and any of you would be foolish as to write honest opinions would be out on the streets looking for another job. If I allowed my honest opinions to appear in one issue of my paper before 24 hours, my occupation would be gone. The business of journalists is to destroy the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of mammon, and to sell his country and his race for his daily bread. You know it and I know it. And what folly is this, toasting an independent press? We are the tools of rich men behind the scenes. We are jumping jacks. They pull the strings and we dance. Our talents, our possibilities and our lives are all the property of other men."
And a classic example of this, Richard, is I gave a presentation in Hebden Bridge, Yorkshire, just a few weeks after the events of 7/7. And it was one of the very first public presentations I gave looking at the deconstructing the events of 7/7 and demonstrating that the evidence that was in the public domain did not match the official narrative. And at the end of the evening, this gentleman came up to me, and I still have his business card, and he introduced himself, and he said that he agreed with everything I'd said, and in fact he shared with me some other information. And I looked at the business card, and it was a senior journalist with the Yorkshire Evening Post. And I said, "Well, this is great." I said, "So when does your article appear?" And he hung his head, shook his head, and he said, "Ian, I wrote the article." He said, "I submitted it to my editor, and my editor called me in and said, you know very well this can't go into print. If it goes into print, it'll be journalistic suicide." This is how the people within the mainstream media are effectively kept in line and kept in check.
We as journalists are intellectual prostitutes.
All right, and then we'll take a break, and in the break, I'm just going to go to the toilet. Welcome back. I'm talking to Neil Sanders, author of Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own. Now, we were talking about the media and how it is controlled by intelligence agencies. And possibly by other groups such as the Council on Foreign Relations.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, I mean, there's numerous controls, and we talked about this briefly on the previous show. There's not just the sort of intelligence agencies and stuff like that. There's financial constraints, shareholder constraints and such like that as well. But this is a very interesting quote, and I'm pretty sure that you've actually used this before. This was David Rockefeller in 1991. He said, "We're grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodeterminism practiced in past centuries." So again, they're not really even that shy about telling you.
Well, just interject there, Neil. This is all American media we're talking about generally.
Yeah.
Is there the same level of information about British intelligence agencies' control over the British media, or people who've made such statements?
Well, David Shayler made his statement, and his partner Annie Machon, they wrote the book Spies, Lies and Whistleblowers, and certainly showed that there is embedding of British intelligence agents in British journalists, and they have what is called soft journalists, people who can be depended on to write in a style and with a narrative that suits the purposes of essentially the status quo.
It's rather frustrating because you can guess at who they are just by their behaviour and the sort of things that they say and the way that they say it, but you can't name them because it's not provable.
Well, this is the thing, and often the people who are seemingly the most courageous in this field are actually being used. The famous, we're talking about Carl Bernstein, because Carl Bernstein is the guy that basically put out the CIA and journalism. Sorry, the CIA and the media. In that, basically, he said more than 400 journalists have lived double lives, maintaining covert relationships with the CIA. And further to that, like, he was using quotes of people like CIA agent Frank Wisner, who in the 1950s said, "I can play the media like a mighty Wurlitzer." There are numerous quotes like that, essentially saying that a journalist is cheaper than a prostitute and far more effective. The CIA actually had representatives in every single media outlet already by, in 1991 this was released. There's a department called the PAO, which is the Public Affairs Office. This is the CIA's Public Affairs Office now has relationships with reporters from every major wire service, newspaper, news weekly and television network in the nation. This has helped turn some intelligence failure stories into intelligence success stories. In many instances, we've persuaded reporters to postpone, hold, change, or even scrap stories. The periodical Armed Forces Journal International revealed that the Pentagon had published 371 magazines in the year 1971. That made the Pentagon 16 times larger than America's largest publishing house. This number increased to 1,203 different magazines in 1982.
So how can they get away with that? So you're saying that the Pentagon or whoever are behind various publications that they're putting out. So it's control of information or even disinformation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you're going to have is...
So if they've got departments of journalists sitting at the Pentagon writing weekly articles or what have you, how come that's not generally known about and
where would you publish it?
Objected to.
Where would you publish it? Carl Bernstein had to go to a music magazine to publish it. This is the point.
There are certain British publications that...
Well, I imagine it's exactly the same in Britain.
But the problem is you can't name them because people start getting upset because they say, "You can't prove that, Richard."
Well,
but it's
I'll tell you
what they are.
Well, I'll give you an example. Yes, definitely. Well, I'll give you an example. Well, the other thing is that it's interesting about the fact that they own papers and magazines and sort of certain other things. We also discussed on a previous programme how they will influence films and such like that. But what that leads to is one CIA agent writing a book which is full of disinformation being given a favourable review by another CIA agent who works for a magazine. And so this happens all the time. And one of the ones that we can definitely prove that we know is the case is Woodward and Bernstein. Like Carl Bernstein, as we know...
you're talking about authors, yeah?
The journalist, Woodward and Bernstein, right? Carl Bernstein, who we're talking about, he wrote the article, The CIA and the Media, immortalised as Robert Redford in the film, All the President's Men. Now, All the President's Men tells the story of these two plucky journalists, Woodward and Bernstein, that managed to expose the Watergate scandal, the fact that President Nixon had ordered the burglarizing of government officers to find something, basically. Now, the ultimate culmination of that was I forget whether he was impeached or he resigned, and then many months later he had that humiliating interview with David Frost. This is currently known as Frost-Nixon. Frost-Nixon has been made into a film. It's considered one of the best journalistic spars of all time, where Frost managed to elicit some very, very dodgy phrases and statements from Nixon. I think one of them was, "It's not illegal if the president does it because the president's above the law." Several things about this. So again, we're seeing two huge victories in the eyes of the public there. Woodward and Bernstein have exposed it. David Frost has made the president look a fool. Everybody's happy, except you find out that the Frost-Nixon exchange was scripted by the Pentagon. Scripted by the Pentagon in cahoots with the White House. Nothing that was out of the script was allowed to be talked to. So the whole incident was a contrived incident to make Nixon, again, just like with Cameron, with the Philip Schofield thing, garner sympathy in the public eye. Yes, exactly. Furthermore to that, it gets worse, I'm afraid. It has been exposed that whilst Carl Bernstein is a very, very fine journalist, Bob Woodward is actually a CIA agent that was put with Bernstein to lure him away from the actual truth about the Watergate scandal.
Yeah.
This is highly, highly speculative. It's talked about by Alex Constantine in a couple of his books, but the suggestion was, and this seems to be borne out by the facts, that what the Watergate burglary was there to do was to cover up the expose of the fact that President Nixon had a death list. He had a list of people that were for assassination or for harassment that were either left-wing politicians, left-wing activists, or right-wing politicians that he felt would become a rival to him. So these two massively, hugely successful media exposés by heroes of the media are both false, contrived events.
And I know that David Icke has made a lot of allegations about Bill Clinton having people bumped off in his book.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. It wouldn't be beyond belief. Particularly if you're talking about the scandals like we were talking in the last episode, paedophilic scandals and stuff like that. Essentially, people sometimes need to be shut up.
You mentioned before, you said that one CIA agent who would be a journalist would write a favourable review about another CIA agent who no one knows is an agent to get a book. Now, I'm just going to slightly change the conversation here, Neil, because I made a film a couple of years back about crop circles, okay? And in that film, I provided quite a lot of circumstantial evidence to show that possibly John Lumberg, his name is, who was, I don't know if he still is, the linchpin or the main crop circle maker, that he was possibly MI5, right? Now, all the evidence is in my film, all right, for that. Now, he's known as an artist, all right? Now, I think it's possible that this is done with artists as well, not just columnists and writers, that they will write a favourable review of a particular artist who's been put up by MI5 or whoever, right? Now, the two names that come to light here, right, and I'm not saying that these are, it's just a theory, it's just something that I think might be true. I don't know if it's true. The two names are Banksy, and the other one is
Damien Hirst.
Damien Hirst.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's my theory, and I'm not saying this is true, is that MI5 put forward someone like Damien Hirst, who's possibly an agent.
Yep.
He then puts a sheep in a glass case or something like that, and there's his modern art, or modern Clark as I call it. Yeah. They then favourably review that. They invite a whole load of art critics, and some of them are agents themselves. They write a positive review, and then some daft idiot actually thinks it's worth something and goes and pays £10 million for it, and then that's money in their pocket.
It's slightly worse than that, actually, Richard. What happens is Saatchi & Saatchi commission, the advertising agency, commission Damien Hirst to say, we want you to make a piece of art. He comes back and says, this is it, a shark in a tank or whatever, and they go, brilliant, that's it, that's okay. Then Damien Hirst goes off to other people and gets them to make his art. He then goes back to Saatchi & Saatchi, who go, brilliant, we'll buy that for 10 million quid. 2 weeks later...
Just interrupt you there, Neil. We're hypothesising here. We're not saying this is how it works or this is what happens. We're saying we're just discussing the possibility that this might be what is going on.
Hypothetically, 2 weeks later, Saatchi & Saatchi then put the piece of art, the bejeweled skull, the sheep, whatever.
Piece of shit.
Yep, exactly, on a house brick, whatever. Then they put it on auction, and the starting price is £10 million, because that's what it was worth 2 weeks ago.
So you then get some unsuspecting person who wants to be an arty person who buys it and then pays £10 million for a piece of shit on a brick.
Yeah, well, this is exactly the same thing with certain artists in the entertainment industry as well. Like, okay, you know what's strange? If you go and watch artists like Rihanna, say, if you go and watch Rihanna live, you'll notice that no, quite, but she sings at 2 tones below what is output on her record, and that's because essentially she's not a very good singer. And so she hasn't got the range to hit the keys that she actually wants to. You can do that with manipulation in the studio, but live, her voice just isn't powerful enough to carry it on. Okay. So the question is, if this person is not a particularly skilled artist, not certainly up there with the highest echelons, why put the effort into making people think that they are? Well, it's because essentially they are part of an agenda, or they are safe in as much as they can be manipulated and moulded and told to do exactly what you want.
Anyone who writes a book, your book, will only get sales if it's reviewed in the mainstream media favourably in all of the right journals.
Yeah,
so, have you sent your book to any of these, to any major newspapers?
No, I think they'll ask me to take the bit out where I suggest that George H.W. Bush is a paedophile. I think they'll probably ask me to take that out. So I thought I'll keep that in because it's a witness statement.
Of George W. Bush?
No, not of George W. Bush. Paul Benassi basically implicated George H.W. Bush in the Franklin scandal. Yes, in my book.
All right. So somebody said George Bush is a paedophile?
Yeah, Paul Benassi did.
George Bush Senior?
George H.W. Bush Senior, yeah.
All right.
That's quite well documented.
Right.
But this is the problem. Essentially, if you go to a publishing house or you go to somebody, your vision will be changed and changed and changed. And this can be, say if you're a musician, oh, well, you know, this one about, like, you know...
9/11.
Yeah, scrap that, because that won't sell. Okay, maybe we'll stick it on your second album, maybe we'll stick it on your third album, but at the minute, what we're doing is we're building up an audience. We don't want to do anything too controversial. You're in a film, you're writing a film, we've already discussed it. If you want to portray the US military or use military equipment, they get a final rewrite of the script. If you're writing anything for television, somebody will come in and they will change it, they will alter it so that your original vision has been sort of co-opted. And this will be explained to you in a, look, this is marketing, we know what we're talking about, but that's not your original vision. And this happens across the board in all avenues of output.
Incidentally, you can get this book from Neil's website, which is?
NeilSandersMindControl.com.
NeilSandersMindControl.com. You can also buy it from richplanet.net. 2 books, in fact. Now then, Neil, a little while back, I displayed some of these Daily Mail headlines on the show, stuck together. Okay, so this one here, where there's a story here with the word handcuff in it, which is a nothing story because it's just apparently some mental patient or other
had to be handcuffed,
and it's such a scandal because the police had to handcuff him. So did police have to handcuff some mental patient or other? But it's next to a picture of Kate, which is unrelated to that, and it looks like she's handcuffed, right? So I thought that was possibly a subliminal, and there's another one here with the Queen. There's several with the Queen appeared. There was another one with Kate, 7 bomb victim. If your eye just passes across there, bomb victim Kate. Now I don't know whether they're just coincidences or what. Have you got any thoughts on whether they're putting subliminal messages into
subliminal advertising minds? Is not illegal in America. A lot of people don't realise this. It is used in America. Like, a lot of people think, I'm not sure about those particular ones, because how would you know? No one's ever going to admit to it, are they, anyway? But basically, subliminal advertising is used in America. Still, I mean, there was the famous incident of, it was an anti-Al Gore political advert, and basically, if you freeze framed it, it had the word rats that came up whenever Al Gore was mentioned or something like that. Now, most people, when they think about subliminals, right, okay, subliminal advertising, the famous experiment is the James Vickery one, where essentially it was a cinema, and what he did was he put up a fraction of a second, a frame that said, drink Coca-Cola, eat popcorn, and then reported that this caused increases in sales.
But the people wouldn't consciously see it?
No,
at all?
Not. Apparently not, no.
They would come out of the cinema and say, if they were told that message had been on, they would say, no, it wasn't.
Yeah,
so
it was too fast for them to visually...
Right.
Okay.
But it had an impact on them.
Well, according to James Vickery, the thing is, what's strange about that particular experiment is later it was exposed to be a hoax. Now, whether that was a hoax or not, I'm not sure. But prestigious universities, I forget, Harvard was certainly one, Yale was certainly one, and very recently, it's discussed in the second book.
Somebody sent me a DVD that they'd taken of Fox News in America just before the adverts, putting out quite sort of, I'm not sure what the word it was.
It's the one with the devil, actually, as well. I don't know if anyone's seen that, but it's Fox News, and then this is an explosion, and the devil's face comes out. Like, but the point is that essentially, in the past few years, very, very prestigious psychological departments in universities have actually done investigations into this, and they've discovered that subliminals do actually work. The brain does pick up and notice and react to things, even if the visual, if you don't consciously pick it up. It's picked up by the visual cortex and processed in the brain without your knowledge.
You're consciously knowing it.
Yeah. What's really, really strange as well, okay, there was a negative subliminals work far more than positive subliminals. The obvious one is sex, but this particular, I think this was at Harvard, forgive me if I'm wrong, the experiment was a very simple thing. They go into a room, do a computer program, it's like some maths puzzles or whatever, and leave the room as fast as possible. Two sets of groups, one got positive words, happy, handsome, that sort of thing. The other got diseased, foolish, elderly, you know, all of these, what could be considered negative words. What's interesting is the people that were given the negative words took about 20 times longer to complete the simple task. The people who got the positive words completed it very fast and reported positive feelings.
And were they consciously aware of the words?
No.
They weren't?
No.
Okay. All right, well, join us after the break for more on psychological manipulation. Welcome back. I'm talking to Neil Sanders, who is author of Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own. Now, these psychological techniques, Neil, are not new, are they?
Oh, no, absolutely not. No, I mean...
and they've been used in warfare?
Well, especially in warfare, but you've got to realise that you're in essentially a constant state of war, according to the status quo, because they don't want the status quo to alter. The sort of at the very beginning of the First World War, there was an agency that set up by Lord Northcliffe, which was called Wellington House. Wellington House was the precursor to Tavistock, and it had people like Walter Lippmann was involved in it, and Edward Bernays was also involved in Wellington House. And what their job was specifically to do was to spread propaganda to convince people to want to fight in the First World War. And what they were doing is they were spreading lies, essentially, about the German army's treatment of Belgian civilians. And this would basically be that they were mutilating children, they were cutting their arms and legs off, not killing them. They were cutting their arms and legs off so that many years later they could not come back and fight. And there was also the scenario of gang rapes. Okay, what they would do is they would basically round up all the women and then they'd all take their turn and cheer on whilst there was a mass rape. This transpired to be not true. Okay, this was the whole point. Even embedded Allied journalists at the time were reporting back saying this is just not the case. This is being used to demonise him. Kaiser Wilhelm at the time was portrayed as a ruthless brute and was given the nickname the Butcher of Berlin. Where have we heard that? The Butcher of Grozny, the Butcher of Baghdad. I even saw something saying that Assad of Syria was a butcher the other day. So that's basically...
Yeah, they're demonising him now, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely, they're demonising him with an incredible double bluff.
Like Cameron was there on the TV the other day slating Assad.
Yeah,
and it's...
Well, it's ridiculous. I mean, there are already videos on YouTube of the Free Syrian Army, which is essentially the same CIA-trained Al-Qaeda Muslim fundamentalists, poor disillusioned fools that think that their freedom fighting is actually being coerced by the CIA and the US military. They're using poison gas on rabbits. They're showing tests. It's a real double bluff, because basically they've come out and said, if you use chemical weapons on your civilians, we're going to attack. And they've said, we haven't got any. They said, you better not use them, which is ludicrous. I mean, the question is posed, do you think that the Syrian nation is absolutely stupid? What would be the benefit of gassing their own civilians? Even if let's take it as read that he's just bad, that he just hates his civilians, he's not suicidal. He knows that would cause an immediate response. It's just what is happening is a narrative is being set up, just like weapons of mass destruction, just like any of these things, Libya's weapons of mass destruction, and Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. And again, it's propaganda before you go in.
There's a new film come out about a raid on is it the American embassy in Iran?
Yeah, Catherine Bigelow's
which is supposedly, what I've read is that it's complete propaganda.
I'm not surprised. She's also doing one, I may be confused actually, she's doing one about the raid on the Osama bin Laden compound.
Right.
She's the one that did Hurt Locker, which is, again, officially Hurt Locker received no funding from the Pentagon and stuff like that, but it was touted afterwards by the Pentagon as being a huge recruitment tool. So we can read between the lines that is the sort of level of double propaganda that happens in films. There's a famous film, a John Wayne film called The Green Berets, that was completely scripted by the military, but they removed all thanks to the military in the credits, so that it wasn't so obvious that this was done. And just to go back to the propaganda thing, the most recent one was the concept of babies being dashed to death, dragged out of incubators before we went to get the butcher of Baghdad, Saddam Hussein, in the first.
Yeah, they often will put stories out that pull at the heartstrings.
Absolutely.
We've had this with the Leveson rubbish, which is Madeleine McCann's parents' phone hacked, Millie Dowler, now some girls, their parents' phones hacked. It's just
I agree with you.
Obvious psyop.
Yeah, I agree with you that A, that's not hacking, and B, I agree with Ian Hislop, of all people, for a strange reason. There are laws against all the things that were done.
Exactly,
we do not need a new set of rules to come in to do it.
When someone commits a murder, do they all get round and say, we really need to change these laws on murder because someone's committed murder? It was already illegal, as you say, everything in... Well, but to me... Plus, it's a huge exaggeration what they were doing. They were listening to people's messages, which is wrong, but it's not.
No, it's not.
It's not akin to murdering 56 people.
No, it's not. And the other thing that's interesting is that the one that really pulled on people's heartstrings, the fact that Millie Dowler's messages were apparently erased by the journalists, has come out to be almost certainly not true. What has actually happened is that the messages have stayed on the phone for so long that the phone company has deleted them to free up. Again, not sure if that is actually true or whether that's the press sort of covering their own backs, but it's interesting that the thing that sparked off such great interest in it is, like you say, reprehensible as it is, it's either a crime or it's not.
To me, the whole Leveson thing is a problem, reaction, solution, psyop, right?
Absolutely.
Now, the question is, what's it really been set up for? So initially it was put out a year and a half ago on the date of 7/7, and they knew they were going to do it because, as I've revealed, the domain name was bought before these stories came out. So to me, it was masking certain things about 7/7 initially, but they've also destroyed a whole load of documents at the News of the World. That was possibly another motive. But to me, I think there's been a long-term motive, perhaps, which is to change the rules by which the media operate.
Well, one of the things that they said, one of the initial things that they said is, right, from now on, if you're a police officer and you're whistleblowing against the police themselves, don't go to the press, go internally within the police. Well, if you were cynical, you could say, well, that's basically just allowing for an internal cover-up straight away. What's clever about this is it's being played very, very cleverly by David Cameron. David Cameron's going, I refuse to do this, I refuse to do this.
That's theatre.
He will cave in because the public will clamour for it.
But for me, right, we've already discussed, Neil, that the mainstream media are in the pockets of the intelligence agencies, right? They're controlled by them. So they already have control over the media. So this, the media need to be controlled, it's absolute bull, okay? Now, so when these recommendations come in, I can't help feel you've got the mainstream media here, they've got total control of that. They've got this thing over here, which is the alternative media. And they're starting to get control of the alternative media, by the way, and I will be covering this in my upcoming talk, but they haven't got control of all of it. No. So they then create a scandal out of them. They bring in the new rules and they can apply the new rules to them. Yeah,
that's the thing that, particularly again with like going back to the Jimmy Saville thing, it's going to be so that, or the intention could well be that you're not allowed to speculate without absolute concrete facts. And even if you are with concrete facts, due to the libel laws, I mean, like Scallywag magazine, which you should all go and read that article, by the way, that was shut down because John Major sued them, and due to the nature of libel laws in this country, you can tie somebody up in litigation for literally years and years and years and set the level that you want to sue them at. So essentially, What John Major sued Scallywag about, Scallywag put an article saying that he was having an affair with Edwina Currie. Edwina Currie, who we've also discussed, was covering up paedophiles. Okay, that turned out to be true. Despite the fact that it was true, due to the nature of the libel laws, he was able to sue them out of existence.
Right.
So this is the problem, and this is what's going to happen with the alternative media as well. It's basically some sort of rule will come in whereby you won't be able to do it. To me, it's almost like this thing that they were trying with comedy, saying you can't make a joke that could be offensive to somebody else's sensibilities, somebody else's religion, somebody else's lifestyle, and such like that. It's presented in such a way that it's for the good, the greater good of the public, and it's for fairness. It's to be fair and balanced. But it's not, is it? It is a control, and I think that's the whole thing. I think this is a real. You need to take a real big step back from this.
And do you think the internet is a target?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they've already tried the various different things throughout the past couple of years. You know, the bills that they were going to do to Internet 2 and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was met with huge outcry by the public. One thing about propaganda, one thing about entering a war, one thing about doing anything is that you've got to convince the public that it's what they want. Problem, reaction, solution, the Hegelian dialectic, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, whatever you want to call it. You've basically got, like, it's why there's false flag operations before wars. Like Pearl Harbor is the classic one. Nobody wanted to go to. You know, basically the majority of Americans had German ancestry because America is a migratory country. So nobody wanted to actually go to war against Germany. That's why basically they only declared war against Japan. The day after Pearl Harbor, 1 million Americans signed up.
Right. Just to go back to the Leveson thing, it is incredible how they've managed to include all of these celebrities, Hugh Grant and Steve Coogan, who are sitting there slightly annoyed at the fact that they've had a telephone message listened to, and actually believing that they are somehow important in all of this. That they have actually been used as unwitting assets.
You know what's ludicrous about this, okay, is Steve Coogan has had huge amounts of unsavoury things coming out in the past about his affairs with Courtney Love, his drug use and stuff like that. We all know about that, okay? Hugh Grant got caught with Divine Brown, you know, the prostitute, okay? The much worse things have happened to these celebrities that as there is in the public eye. I personally do not know what information was actually gleaned from listening to Steve Coogan or Hugh Grant's answer phone messages.
Well, yeah. Just consider that. I've said this before. What kind of things do people leave on people's answer messages? Normally, it's...
Sorry, I missed you. I'll call you back.
Exactly. Hi Neil, Richard here. Can we do an interview? Call me back. Yeah. That's the kind of thing. You don't generally give a whole lot of sensitive information in a message.
You know what's even more about this? I would suggest that people go back and watch this program called Newswipe by Charlie Brooker. It's all available on YouTube. He talks about blagging and phone hacking, as it was called. That's where they've got the term hacking from the media. He talks about this 2 years before this actually came out. So this was well known. It was publicised on BBC4. Nobody seems to care. People don't realise that the amount of intricate sort of intertwining between government and media. In England, there was a famous case a few years ago.
But Neil, you say government, right? The problem is... all of the MPs have got whipped up in this fake scandal, this fake phone hacking scandal, and they're in Parliament getting angry about it. So they're manipulating all of those politicians as well. They're duping them into thinking that there's a scandal going on here.
And with a lot of those politicians, I wonder if they've been told, do you want your name to come up in relation to this childcare home in Wales? Well, then you clamour, and I didn't get a harumph out of that guy. You watch your ass. Right, the one that was on in England was basically... it was a few years ago when the Labour government was still in, and the Sun ran a campaign to get migrants out of Britain, stop this tide of migrants and stuff, which is the usual right-wing claptrap that's, again, phony bone of contention. What happened after about a week of this campaign was David Blunkett, the then Home Secretary, deigned to do an interview with the Sun and basically said, look, I don't think you're right, but the Sun's campaign and the response from the public has proved to me that we, the Labour government, will change our policy. Journalist Peter Oborn, I forget which publication he was working for at the time, but he came across a thing called the Downing Street Grid. The Downing Street Grid is their political and media calendar for the next month. He found the previous, 2 months back, previous grid, before the scandal had actually broken, detailing the exact words that Blunkett was going to use in his interview to respond to the clamouring from the Sun. So the Sun gets to look like it's people's champion, the people get to think that they are doing something, and the government looks magnanimous in the way that it kowtows to the public pressure.
Right, okay. The only problem I've got, Neil, is to determine which page I'm actually going to use. But that's all I've got time for today, Neil. It's great talking to you as ever, and just remind us where people can get your book.
From Rich Planet, and also from neilsandersmindcontrol.com, and also there's a load of videos on there as well, so if you've not seen previous ones, please check it out. Oh, and I've also got a Facebook thing, which is slightly paradoxical because I hate Facebook, but please like it so I feel like I'm popular.
All right. Thanks, Neil. It just remains for me to say, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.
Psychological processes of the human brain, you know, without your sort of knowledge of it, and it's very, very powerful. And then what I go on to talk about is how the mainstream media, the entertainment industry, the music industry, how that's all used to sort of coerce people into different ways, how COINTELPRO and various things come in to silence artists that don't go along with the agenda. And then that one rounds up by sort of drawing back on the MK Ultra. My postulation is that essentially the LSD explosion in America and the Haight-Ashbury and the anti-war movement essentially in music coming out of San Francisco was actually a military-industrial complex experiment. All the bands were intimately connected with the military-industrial complex, just in the same way that serial killers are usually.
Now, these books are available from richplanet.net. They're priced £15 plus postage. They're also available from Neil's website. Give us a domain name, Neil.
It's neilsandersmindcontrol.com, and on there basically there's the book, and there's also some videos, previous shows that we've done, and some radio shows and such like that.
Okay, all right. Now then, we spoke about the scandals that have been in our media. The Jimmy Saville one of note. What's going on with Jimmy Saville, Neil?
Well, I've totally forgotten about Jimmy Saville, I'm afraid. I'm beside myself with joy at the knowledge that Kate Middleton's pregnant. How can that not be great for the entire
We'll come on to that.
Jimmy Saville. I think the thing about Jimmy Saville is that what people don't perhaps realise is that it's not one person. Jimmy Saville is a tiny portion of an elite sex ring, and we spoke about this on sort of programmes before, and we'll cover it today. The Franklin scandal was one of the main ones that we've talked about, and the McMartin preschool trial.
Right. So this is in the mid 1990s, is it? The Franklin
Franklin one
cover
was the mid 90s, yeah.
Right. So this is another sort of sex scandal with an element of cover up and an element of putting certain information out as a scandal, but not all of the information. Just tell us how that works.
Well, I mean, firstly, just to sort of tie it back to the Wales care thing, my contention is that the Wales care home is not an instance where certain people have used their influence to attack these boys. And this is proven by the fact that the owner of the care home went to prison for basically...
So just backtrack a little, Neil, because some people won't be following this. Jimmy Saville is linked to a particular care home in Wales, is that right?
Well, yeah, Jimmy Saville has been linked to several instances, actually through hospitals as well, Stoke Mandeville, I think it's called, and not Rampton, the psychiatric hospital.
And what does the mainstream media say went on, and what was the scandal at these establishments?
The mainstream media seems to say that basically Jimmy Saville, due to his fabulous influence and the fact that he was making so much money for charity, became a sort of untouchable person. And unbeknownst to absolutely everybody, he was using this influence to abuse literally hundreds and hundreds of children at the various institutions.
At these various children's homes and hospitals and schools, whatever.
Yeah.
Now, so what you're saying, that's not quite the full picture?
No, that's not quite in my mind, that's not quite the full picture. What it certainly appears to be is that maybe not all of these institutions, but certainly in this case the care home in Wales was being utilised as essentially a brothel, so to speak. The children there are to be used as sex slaves for the members of Parliament, popular celebrities and people of influence. And this is not an unusual thing. This sounds strange and outrageous, but hopefully we'll go along the examples later. This is not uncommon. It's a military industrial complex intelligence agency style setup where they will use these kids for two purposes. One is just basically they're there for the leisure and pleasure of the celebrities, and the second reason that they're there is to be provided for blackmail against these very same celebrities. And this again, this was actually happening in MK Ultra. There was a lady called Claudia Mullen, and she testified before Congress in 1995, and actually was given compensation and an apology by President Clinton, that members of the MK Ultra, the doctors that were involved intimately in the beginnings of MK Ultra, were basically using her for that very same experience when she was 9. They were basically filming her with secret cameras and pimping her out.
If you think about it, if you get people, let's say, commit adultery or other misdemeanors, that's in the modern age, that's not really going to bother people. Whereas if someone's filmed having sex with an underage child, they can then be controlled.
Well, Silvio Berlusconi is considered to be quite the lad. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's got dozens and dozens of mistresses. He's going to all these prostitutes at his bunga bunga parties. Sarkozy's got a mistress. Everyone knows about this. And you know what it's presented as is, hey, you know what? If I had to go for a drink with a politician, I'd go with Silvio Berlusconi. Like, totally ignoring the fact that he's mafiaed up to here and he was involved in the Propaganda Due scandal and you know, when Roberto Calvi, God's banker, was hanged.
So just to get back to Saville then, you think that Saville was kind of a middleman in getting people to those establishments and then using those children? Is that what you're saying?
It certainly appears to be. And the thing with the Kate Middleton story about her pregnancy, to my mind, again, it's not proof, it's just what I think, is that this is being used as a convenient distraction to distract from the fact that Jimmy Saville was not only linked to these care homes, but he was intimately linked with the royal family. There's numerous photographs of him hanging out with various members of the royal family. Apparently, for some reason, he acted as a go-between, negotiating between Diana and Charles when their marriage was on the rocks. It's also come out in the mainstream media that Jimmy Saville was employed to provide guests for royal parties. Now, whether that is a euphemistic term for children, we don't know, but it's certainly, if you read between the lines, it's very strange.
So, in a way, they're possibly being used as some kind of a trap, you think? So you cite other examples where there's been a scandal, like the Franklin cover-up, and there's this Belgian serial killer, or you mentioned several serial killers who you think were not just serial killers. Tell us about them now then, Neil.
Well, I mean, the connections to the scandal home are various places. There's Marc Dutroux was a guy in Belgium, and essentially it's very, very strange with Marc Dutroux because
this serial killer killed lots of young girls and did all sorts of horrible things to them.
And 2 grown men. What happened was
he had a little sort of
it was a cell
underneath his house that he built.
In a basement, which is another thing that comes up and again, people being trapped in cells beneath their house. The specific thing about the Marc Dutroux case is that it came out in Belgium, and it actually caused a huge scandal because essentially it looked like there was a cover-up. Furthermore to that, it doesn't just look like there's a cover-up, it almost looks like this guy Marc Dutroux was set up in a position to be able to do what he did. Initially he went to prison, he was given like something like a 15 to 20 year sentence for the abduction and rape of 5 women. Him and his wife were basically abducted and raped these 5 women. For some strange reason, he was let out of prison after about 3 years. So incredibly early. It was actually a light sentence for what he'd done anyway. For some reason, he was able to get out of prison early. When he got out of prison, he immediately went around buying 7 houses. He apparently owned 6 or 7 houses, all completely paid for, despite the fact that he was unemployed. He was trained as an electrician, but he was apparently unemployed. Right. The interesting thing as well is that basically when he first came out of prison, he was awarded with a pension, an incredibly high pension, which is also unusual given the fact that he was in his 30s. Right. He was also given a prescription from the government for no apparent reason to be given an unlimited supply of Rohypnol. Now, Rohypnol, as you might know, is the date rape drug. It's the clear liquid you put in people's drinks, and basically people become completely. You can tell them to do whatever they want, and they will actually do it. So the question is, why is this this person doing it? Now, what is strange is the second that he came out of prison as well, his mother got in touch with the police and said, "You need to rearrest my son." I know that when he was released, his psychiatrist said we should never release this person. Right. He's a dangerous sex offender. Despite that, they still released him. His mother actually sent letters to the police saying, "My son has got 2 girls kidnapped and being held in a cell beneath his house." The police ignored this.
Right, and there are other instances when the police have searched his house and they've not found there was girls that have been kept in this cell, and so it looks as though the police were being. Well, the outrage in Belgium was that the whole system was protecting this guy.
Well, his house was searched twice by a gentleman called René Michaud. René Michaud was the head, basically it's the gendarmerie, which is the equivalent of local police to FBI in Belgium. Right. Now, what happens, the local police were really concerned about Marc Dutroux because all these girls were going missing, and for whatever reason, they were being given the runaround. What happened was, eventually, these 2 girls went missing, nothing was done about it. The parents of the children had to get a private detective. And he basically very soon said, we need to go and look at Marc Dutroux's house. What Marc Dutroux had been doing has been kidnapping girls, sexually abusing them and filming them, sometimes killing them and filming them, and manufacturing these videotapes with a series of accomplices. One of them was named Bernard Weinstein. He was actually a politician from France.
So that film would then be used to control the politician.
Yeah, A, it could be used as a control for whoever it is that's in the group, and B, it could just be sold as a snuff film because there is a market for extreme pornography.
What I've heard is that what they'll do is they'll just send this politician or whoever it is a copy of it, of them doing this dastardly deed. Yeah. They then are under control.
What's strange, okay, is that basically his wife was a teacher and the other partner of his was a businessman, he was acquitted, I must say, for legal reasons, called Michel Nihoul. And he was basically he's like equivalent of like a sort of Richard Branson type character in Belgium. Now, as I say, what was going on with these kids were going missing and missing.
And there was a quote from him as well, Neem, where he alludes to the fact that I'm just a small cog.
I'm just a small cog. Well, this is the point. When he was actually arrested and he went to trial, which took for some reason about 8 years to go to trial, which is a classic sort of stalling technique because witnesses die, people change their mind, people move away and stuff like that. When they eventually had to do the trial, by the time the trial had gone, 30 material witnesses had died. The other thing that suggests a cover-up is that basically when René Michaud went there to search with the gendarmerie, he went in there with an electrician. I don't know why he was in there with the electrician. The electrician came up from the cellar and says, "You need to go down to the cellar, there's children in here, I can hear their voices." They went down to the cellar, heard these children crying, and for some strange reason, René Michaud, rather than saying, "Is there anyone there?" seemingly talking to
Welcome to Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Tonight's guest has appeared on the show several times in the past and has just completed his first book entitled Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own. Now, recently we have had a number of so-called scandals in our media, and we're going to discuss some of them today because I think today's guest will probably agree with me that these stories are carefully orchestrated psyops rather than random scandals. Welcome to the show, Neil Sanders.
Thank you, Richard.
All right, then, Neil, I mentioned your book in the intro there. Just tell us about it, because it's actually two books.
Yeah, it was
Volume 1 and Volume 2, Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own.
Well, basically, it's a lot of information in there, basically. It was originally going to be one book, but unfortunately, just due to the sheer size of it, I thought it would be better to split it into two, because then it's slightly easier to cope with, really.
So, Volume 1 is subtitled Mind Control, Mass Manipulation and Perception Management.
Yeah, Volume 1 deals really with MKUltra, declassified documents, the Tavistock Institute, and English mind control. It then looks at the various techniques, the admitted, documented techniques of mind control, hypnosis, trauma, various drugs and things like that. Psychotronic weaponry, electromagnetic waves, and various devices that can cause mind control.
Right. So the nuts and bolts of mind control, essentially.
Absolutely, and then from there, basically, I've been able to have a look at certain people who were considered to be potential mind control victims, like Sirhan Sirhan and Mark Chapman. Also admitted mind control victims like Christine Di Nicola and Claudia Mullin and people like that. And then what I do at the end is I speculate. In the first volume, I speculate on the strange similarities between the Phoenix program, which was an organised chaos. It was essentially violence against the civilians of the Vietnam War, and it was a CIA operation. And the remarkable similarities to the techniques that were used in that and serial killers that came about in America just after the finish of the Vietnam War. All
right. Now the second one is subtitled Mind Control, Mass Manipulation and Perception Management, and this covers the media and film.
Well, it's movies, marketing movies and music, so it concentrates on a lot of the sort of social psychology, things like the herd instinct. Gustav Le Bon and people like that talk about the sort of mass hypnosis that can happen, how advertisers basically play on these